Impact of limited buffer size on capacity loss. In this segment, we're going to focus on tandem queues. Tandem queues are sequential queuing systems where departure process of one server is an arrival process for the next server downstream. So in this picture, you see this server there's a waiting line in front of it, and the output of this server is processed through moves to the next server, and there might be a waiting line in front of that second server, right? So, for example, if the inflow to this server might have inter-arrivals might be exponentially distributed, or there might be a Poisson process of arrivals, the arrivals here will not be Poisson because they will be affected by the joint randomness of arrivals and processing time on this server. So these systems are harder to evaluate mathematically and analytically. They can be evaluated through simulation. Such systems occur often. Like an example of the production setting would be the assembly line of kick scooters that we had in topic 4. Right, variability was ignored there in that topic 4, but we could still consider the impact of variability on the capacity. And in service systems, there are many types of service systems that have tandem queues. One example would be immigration process at the airports. That includes first immigration authority and then the customs. So when buffers are limited in tandem queuing systems, we might experience capacity loss due to two types of phenomenons. One is called blocking and the other is starvation. A resource is starved if it is idle and the buffer feeding it is empty. Right? So in this case, an example would be this resource. The white dot represents a space, empty space for a flow unit. There is nothing being processed here, and there is a limited buffer here, but there is nothing, right? No units are present in this buffer, and this unit has not been yet completed, and this resource is starved. Now, this is just another word for the resource being idle, right? But it is actually coming from different contexts. For example, when packets are processed in telecommunications systems, we often talk about resources being blocked or starved when waiting lines are limited by some limited memory of the buffer. In the second type is blocking, and this is a new type of phenomenon that we haven't considered so far. Blocking is when you have a resource that completed working on a flow unit, but it cannot move the unit forward because the buffer in front of the downstream resource is full. An example is here where this resource was busy with a unit, and now activity is completed here, but the buffer following that resource is full. There are 3 units here and no more space, and this resource is still working on another unit. So this is occupied. These 3 spaces are occupied, and despite this being completed, the unit cannot be moved forward, right? So this usually happens in some kind of production settings or computer systems because usually it rarely happens that you cannot move people forward, although it might also happen in services, like, for example, medical services, where you cannot move someone out of the surgery if, for example, the intensive care unit has not finished preparing space for the patient. Right? This would be considered a mismanagement, right? Because usually the surgery room is a very important resource that is like a bottleneck that should be protected. Analysis of these kind of systems with limited capacity and sequential servers, right, or serial queuing systems is normally done through some kind of simulation because it's very difficult to analytically determine parameters or statistics about the system when we have limited buffers and all the interactions of different randomness effects. So we are seeing here on this slide an example of 4 simulations just to compare the effect of limited buffers. And so we have basically 3 activities that need to be completed in different way of organizing work. And processing times for those activities are random with mean values that are shown below. So here we see the first system has 3 sequential steps. This one is the first step or activity with 6.5 minutes per unit. This is 7 minutes per unit, and this is 6 minutes per unit. But remember, these are just average times. There is some randomness, right? So if there was no randomness, this would be processing, right, with no buffers. This would be processing the units at with the cycle time of 7 minutes per unit, right? If there was no randomness, that's what would happen. However, if there is significant randomness in the simulation, the result is on average a unit takes 11.5 minutes. And you might be surprised that it is so much larger, but remember, this unit, this time, 7 minutes on average, the actual realizations may be short or long. It might be that one unit takes 4 minutes or another unit takes 10 minutes, right? And it all also depends. There's a lot of blocking or starvation that may happen here because it is enough that one of those operations, for example, this operation, if it takes shorter time, it might not be able to move forward when this takes longer, right? And if this one takes longer time, then this one becomes idle. And so there is a lot of interactions here that we cannot easily analyze, but we can solve this problem using simulation, and this is what was obtained here. And notice if we add a buffer of just one, for just one unit, so the size of this buffer is 1 and this buffer is 1, and then the cycle time now is reduced to 10 minutes. So buffer helps us regain some of the lost capacity, right? And in this case, when we add unlimited buffers, this is the third case, right? So there's unlimited buffer here and here. The cycle time becomes 7 minutes, but of course there is a lot of inventory accumulated here, and maybe we should actually start controlling this inventory so this unit shouldn't produce when this buffer reaches a certain number of reasonable number of units. There shouldn't be just 1 or 2 units here because due to randomness, this might start working slower when this works faster, and there should be enough units here to protect this bottleneck resource, right? The one that has the largest activity time is clearly a bottleneck here. And you see, if there is a lot of inventory in the stable state, this system can work with a cycle time of 7 minutes, so one unit is produced every 7 minutes. And of course, right, because there is also this imbalance as we did in the assembly line, if you, let's say, change this organization and had 3 workers, let's say, processing all 3 activities together, right, then each of those resources would take 6.5 plus 7 plus 6 minutes on average, right? So that's 19.5 minutes per unit. And in this case, even if there is randomness, doesn't really matter. Each unit on average, each server on average processes 1 unit every 19.5 minutes. And so that on average means 1 unit is produced every 6.5 minutes, or 3 units are produced every 19.5 minutes. So in this case, we would get the fastest production, right? So the capacity would be the largest. So you might see some similarity of this analysis with the buffer or suffer case in our topic 6 on batch production. However, notice here we're focusing more on randomness, right? But the same phenomenon happens if you don't have buffers, or if you have limited buffers, right? There is the suffering, there is the loss of capacity. If there are large buffers with randomness, the cycle time is 7 minutes. If the buffer is limited to just 1 unit here, 1 unit here, the cycle time increases to 10 minutes, and with no buffers, the cycle time increases to 11.5 minutes. So limited buffers in tandem queues reduce capacity, they reduce it significantly if there is a lot of randomness.